Well, it's pretty chilly today, but we're going to be talking the rear axle for the Kiddy Car. So you can see laid out here is the axle. It's a standard ATV axle that I bought, but I've had to modify it in a couple of key areas. Firstly, this is a brake disc and here's the sprocket, but this designed to take hubs which have splines on, and that's great, and you can use these locking rings to keep them in place, but really I wanted the sprocket closer in to the chassis rail. That's because of the width of the motor. So if I had it in the normal position here, then the motor itself would be against the chassis rails or into them. So I really wanted to move this across closer to the chassis rail, and then it fit nicely in the axle. We'll see that shortly. So what I had to do here was I've taken a hub and I've bored it out to match the diameter of the shaft, which is 25 centimetres. So it's pretty chunky as this sort of length of axle goes, but then I've welded it onto the axle. I've had to grind off some of the threads, which are these, which existed here, so that I could do that. Once that was done, I could weld on the hub. The other thing I've done is on the sprocket itself, I've had to re-drill it to match the threaded holes on the hub, but by doing that it has a nice recess which is the same diameter as the hub, so it fit together, but there's a slight amount of tolerance because the hub itself has got a turn down edge, so I faced off the hub so that it removed that turn down edge, so this sprocket just fits neatly, really neatly in there, so that there's no relative sort of movement between the two, and is able to re-drill it and move forwards. The other thing that I'm using on these is, you see these are standard pillow blocks and they have a little grub screw in there, and that's fine, that sort of keeps them in position, but with an axle you get quite a high level of lateral load between as you sort of corner. Obviously not so much in the Kiddy Car, but you do get this lateral load. So one of the things I've been using is these. Now this is a collar that fits onto the end of here and is a split collar, so that is really two half moons which then bolt together. That allows a lot more tightness compared to the little grub screws. You've got sort of M4s and these I think M6s, so the threads are a lot bigger, so a lot sturdier. So once those are bolted on, once that width is set, that just doesn't move. So that's a really good way of keeping the axle from moving side to side. And you don't want that, because if you've got to line up the sprocket with the pinion, if these get out of line, it's a bit like a normal sort of racing bike where you've got a cog with different sizes and the arm moves the chain so that you go on to different size sort of sprockets. If you get a chain out of alignment, so if you've got, rather than there, maybe the sprocket and the pinion are like that to each other, that gives you a good chance of actually just the chain coming off, which is not what you want really. So keeping that tolerance that way is really important. And the same on the brake disc is you're clamping this way, so if this moves this way, then you're changing the potential for the clamping. There's a little bit of tolerance, but you can't have it wiggling about everywhere. So having these collars is really good, supported by the pillar blocks, adjusted for weld. I mean, fundamentally, obviously, probably a better solution at the end of the day would probably be a hollow 25mm go-kart axle, be a lot lighter. I still have a problem with the hubs at the end. I'd already got these hubs which just bolt on and fit the wheels I've got. So this, because I had it, it's a good cheap way of getting that in place. So right, so let's have a look at this, how this axle looks on the chassis, and we'll talk through some of the work that's been done on the chassis. Okay, now we've got the axle bolted onto the rear part of the chassis. I've just put the hubs on loosely. We've got the shaft collars on either end, so there's no movement that way. And if you just spin it, you can just see how that moves. So that's all good. In the meantime, I've also made the bracket for the brake caliper. It's going to be a single hydraulic brake caliper for the whole of the Kiddy Car. It's going to bolt and actuate on that there. So there's a bracket, so that's just going to hold that there. The bracket's made out of a couple of angline pieces. Important that when this is flipped over the right way up, that the bleed nipple is higher than the inlet, so that any trapped air just is easy to get out the system. If you don't do that, then it's a real pain. But I've done that, so that's really all sorted, so that's good. So just put that there. The other thing is, obviously now I'm starting to work on the brackets for the motor. This is the motor, and it's a bit of a chunk, but you can see it's going to sit there, probably slightly across, just eyeballing where it fits in. And you can see it's almost as wide as the chassis rails themselves, so moving the sprocket from where it be there to there has allowed the motor to drop into the space between the chassis rails. That just gives a little bit more ground clearance, which not massively important, but just nice. It just keeps it out of the way as well. I could have easily just had it sort of here, but then that's not great for balance. This is heavy. This is 5 or 6 kilos, so having it central in position, I think it just feels that ultimately a better job having it that way rather than offset to one side. It's a 420 chain, so it's effectively sort of 1/2 inch chain, so that's pretty chunky. So that's not going to break. It's going to have a level of alignment movement. So the motor itself, the slots run that way, so the motor can do this. I've got some brackets coming, so the motor can do this, so that I can get firstly the pinion to sprocket alignment correct that way, and then secondly I can do the alignment that way, which is really the chain tensioner. So I don't have to worry about having a chain tensioner at all. It will just be in the mechanism to hold the motor, which just makes it a little bit easier, just one less thing to sort of worry about there. I've trimmed up on the chassis rails themselves. I've trimmed up the outriggers, so they're good. I've done some test sizing just to make sure I'm happy with everything. So once the motor bracket is in place, then apart from the master cylinder for the brakes, which will be sitting at the front end, then the fabrication on the chassis will be done. I've still got to work out best way to do the steering column, but that's probably going to be connected to the body. A couple of bump stops, so that's easy enough. I'll probably have it as on its wheels this week, so that it's a basic rolling chassis. It's going to look a lot more like a car at that point rather than just a strange looking ladder. Excited about that and see where I can get this through. So yeah, the idea would be to get the motor brackets done, get the chain in place. The other thing I've got to do as well on the chassis is there's still a lot of the flux and residues from all the welding that's occurred, so that needs to be just wire brushed. and put a wire wheel onto the angle grinder, and that really does the job. And then it can be painted. I might, in each of the two cross members, there are holes at the moment, deliberately so I could pass wires or cables or things through. I might just open those up so I can fit a sort of 20mm grommet in, so that things like the motor cable, which is here, so it can easily get to the controller. Still got to decide where I want to put all the electronics and electrical stuff. The motors, the batteries for the motor is going to sit at the front underneath the bonnet, but you still got speed control, you still got things like the pedal assembly, cut-off switch. I've got a remote RF cut-off switch as well, so that if the kids are heading to disaster somewhere, then you can just switch the car off remotely. You don't have to sort of run and try and catch them before they bump into a tree or something like that. So I've still got the electronics packaging to do, but that's not too difficult really. I think it'd be a lot easier once A, it's on its wheels, B, I've got the basic, really basic base here. The body's going to be wood, so I'm going to have a base on this. So I think the next step is a base, a bulkhead, so I can start playing with things like pedals, where pedals will go, where the steering column will go. Having that base is going to give me my next fixed point to do the rest of the packaging. The body itself, the sides are all in CAD, but really it's coming to a stage where I want to play around with things and just visualise a little bit, and then from then I can finalise some of those packaging bits. So for now, that's all the updates. Next time round it'll probably be on its wheels, and maybe even have its baseboard, just so I can start thinking about those next steps of packaging up, especially things like the electronics and things like that. Thank you for watching.